Working the night shift, an ambulance brought in an unconscious girl for emergency treatment at City General Hospital. The girl was bleeding heavily and needed immediate care. I dialed the emergency contact listed on her phone. The man who answered, claiming to be her husband, was my husband. I had no choice but to personally perform a dilation and curettage, DC, on the girl. Hearing the familiar voice, my hand, gloved for surgery, paused. My first thought was that I was hearing things. Doctor, why isn't my wife answering the phone? What's wrong with her? I forced patience into my voice, still recovering from a cold, and calmly told him she needed surgery immediately and he should come to the hospital as soon as possible. Doctor, I'm currently overseas and can't make it back. Please save my wife. She said she started feeling unwell after dinner. Overseas? What a coincidence. My husband just flew overseas for a business trip yesterday. Sir, please leave a number so we can contact you after the procedure. The man on the other end didn't seem to recognize my voice and rattled off a phone number. Listening, my heart sank. That was Robert Miller's private phone. Very few people knew that number, certainly not including me. The reason I recognized it was my photographic memory for numbers. I had seen this number in his mobile app. The owner was indeed Robert Miller. At the time, I assumed it was for work and didn't think much of it. Until once, Robert Miller ordered delivery medicine and some intimate items for home, and accidentally left this number as the recipient's contact. Although the delivery guy later helped him get the urgent items to the correct place, it didn't change the fact that I knew Robert Miller was cheating. With a life hanging in the balance, I pushed my thoughts aside and prepared for the surgery. From the amount of bleeding the girl had, it looked like she was pregnant and had taken several emergency contraception pills afterward. The girl herself had realized something was wrong and called 911 for help. The emergency nurse told me she had taken emergency contraception. I calmly examined the pale girl. The nurse's blood test results came back quickly. Blood HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, was over 10,000. It seemed I was right. She was over 2 months pregnant with a gestational bleed. After confirming it was an intrauterine pregnancy via ultrasound, I proceeded with the emergency plan to perform a DC to control bleeding. The baby couldn't be saved. On the ambulance, the emergency nurse had already given her a hemostatic agent. But the bleeding was too heavy at the time, and the girl had gone into shock before even reaching the hospital. Fortunately, I'm known as a leading gynecologist, and handling cases like hers is second nature to me. The bleeding stopped, and the girl's respiration and pulse returned to normal. Following surgical protocol, the nurse sent the tissue scraped from the uterus in the surgical tray for pathology testing. After the surgery, the girl was transferred to a regular ward. I peeled off my sterile gloves and stood at the sink, washing my hands over and over. Only when the nurse looked at me curiously, asking, "Ellie? Are you feeling all right?" did I realize my once white hands were now rubbed raw and red. "Oh, yes, I'm fine." Just lost in thought. I sprayed a thick layer of disinfectant on my hands, but I still felt like they were covered in tainted blood. A dark thought crossed my mind. If I hadn't been on duty tonight, would this girl have ended up losing both her life and the baby's? A simple procedure for me doesn't mean it's easy for everyone else. Not everyone can seize that golden window of opportunity to save a life. It seems I saved Robert Miller's mistress's life. But I also personally terminated his child. Could this have been the child Robert Miller yearned for? We had been married for many years without children. It wasn't that I didn't want them. Robert Miller was the one who always refused. He constantly told me he was a child-free couple, dinks, and if I had a child, he would divorce me. To prevent any possibility, he even had a vasectomy at the hospital next door. He only informed me after the surgery. He held my hand and swore, "Eleanor, I only love you in this life. I don't want a child to take away your love for me." Robert Miller was possessive. He knew that if I, being virtuous and a workaholic, were to have a child, I would surely focus only on the child and my work, inevitably neglecting him. But when did he get a vasectomy reversal? Or was the child Summer Green was carrying someone else's? I'm not one to jump to conclusions. All it would take is a paternity test comparing Robert Miller's hair from home with the scraped tissue, and everything would be clear. I'm not a child-free couple, dinks. Secretly, I always wanted to be a mother. But because I loved Robert Miller, I was willing to make sacrifices, thinking maybe it wouldn't be too late if he decided he wanted to be a father later. It also allowed me to focus on realizing my dream of becoming a doctor while I was young. Over the years, I advanced rapidly in the medical field, becoming a leading gynecologist in the city. With a successful career, I had fully accepted that we were a child-free couple, dinks, family. As long as Robert Miller and I loved each other, not having children wasn't a big deal. But ultimately, Robert Miller disappointed me. When I went to check on Summer Green, the girl in her early 20s, she weakly fluttered her large, dark eyes and thanked me, Dr. Vance, thank you. While saying her thanks, her eyes kept studying my face, as if looking at a relative. I was sure she hadn't even glanced at my ID badge when she saw me, so she knew me beforehand. I patiently asked about her post-operative condition, but she tugged at my sleeve and tried to act familiar. Dr. Vance, I'm sorry for causing you trouble. I pulled my hand away, feeling extremely uncomfortable. Summer Green, your husband said he'd be at the hospital later. Next time you're pregnant, don't take random medication. Her face went deathly pale when she heard me, and she clutched my hand helplessly. Dr. Vance, you called him? How did you get his number? Her face was filled with terror. I was completely bewildered. You were bleeding heavily and unconscious at the time, and that was the only emergency contact in your phone. We were just following protocol. Her reaction made me wonder if I had misunderstood Robert Miller. But my phone dinged right on cue. The paternity test results were in. They had a parent-child relationship. Summer Green, hearing my words, quickly fumbled for her phone. When she saw the emergency contact number, she bit her lips tightly, as if that number was a demon that filled her with both hatred and fear. My intuition told me that Summer Green wasn't faking her reaction. There was definitely a story between her and Robert Miller. Her familiarity when she first saw me didn't seem fake either. Right in front of me, she quickly deleted the emergency contact. Dr. Vance, can you please not tell him that my miscarriage was because I intentionally took emergency contraception? I asked hesitantly, you knew you were pregnant? Summer Green's eyes welled up, full of sorrow, and she nodded. He keeps a tight watch on me. I didn't want the baby, but he insisted I have it. My reaction was, if you don't want to have a child, you can discuss it with your husband. Childbearing is a woman's right, not an obligation. Even if he doesn't agree, he has no right to interfere. As a doctor, I couldn't accept her being so careless with her life just to get rid of the baby. Do you know you almost didn't make it? My stern tone didn't seem to scare Summer Green. She gave a self-deprecating smile. It might have been better if I had died. My doubts grew. If Robert Miller wanted a child, he could have just told me. Why force Summer Green to have one? If he was cheating, it should have been consensual. But judging by Summer Green's appearance, she was clearly being forced. Or was she acting because she knew she was the other woman/mistress and about to be exposed? If so, she was a master manipulator of the highest caliber. I wouldn't stand a chance against her. I stared quietly at Summer Green, trying to find a crack in her facade, but she seemed lost in her pain. Even if I died, he wouldn't let me go. He's a monstrous. Out of a doctor's duty, I asked for her consent. Did your husband subject you to domestic abuse? Do you need me to call the police for you? In fact, I hadn't found any signs of physical abuse on her. Summer Green trembled at the word police. No, please don't call the police. Calling the police is useless. They'll make my life a living hell. They? Were there others forcing her besides him? Seeing that her mental state was unstable, I sat down to comfort her. Okay, no police, but can you tell me how they treated you? Maybe I can help you. If Robert Miller had done something monstrous behind my back, I certainly wouldn't stand by. From the moment I found out Robert Miller was cheating, I had already given up on this marriage. But we had been married for many years, and our lives were deeply intertwined financially and personally. I didn't want the despicable man to get off easy. I hired a private investigator, Joe Black, who checked countless times in secret but couldn't find any trace of Robert Miller cheating. Summer Green was my only lead so far. After hearing my words, Summer Green's emotion stabilized considerably. Dr. Vance, as long as he doesn't find out I intentionally caused the miscarriage by taking medication, I'll be all right. I wasn't going to blindly trust Summer Green and just gave a non-committal reply. If Robert Miller knew I had done the surgery, how could he possibly come asking me about Summer Green's condition? I walked out of the ward, ready to go home and rest. But Summer Green's miscarriage kept weighing on my mind. Without knowing whether Summer Green was acting or a victim, I wouldn't trust anyone blindly, nor would I act rashly. I found Joe Black, the private investigator, and gave him Summer Green's basic information. After hearing my description, Joe Black furrowed his brow. As a man, he also couldn't figure out what game Robert Miller was playing. If he was keeping an other woman/mistress, Summer Green's reaction didn't seem like that of an other woman/mistress. If it was a misunderstanding, the child was indeed Robert Miller's. Regardless, Robert Miller's cheating was a confirmed fact. With Summer Green as a breakthrough, Joe Black focused his efforts on her. The next day, I went to City General Hospital for work, only to unexpectedly learn that Summer Green had been taken away by a strange man. I frowned and asked the head nurse, Linda, didn't you try to stop him? Was she leaving voluntarily or being forced? Ellie, she kept her head down the whole time and didn't dare speak. The man wouldn't listen either, saying he was her husband and even produced a marriage certificate. I just had an overseas video call with Robert Miller today. He's still overseas. Where did this husband come from? We couldn't do anything, the family was making a scene. I had to let him go after he signed a voluntary discharge form. Where's the form? Let me see. Linda, the head nurse, flipped through the discharge papers while nervously asking me, Ellie, is there a problem? I took the papers and glanced at the sprawling signature, which felt oddly familiar. But I couldn't for the life of me remember where I had seen it before. We couldn't help it with the family causing a fuss. Fortunately, Summer Green's condition wasn't too serious, she should be all right. To be safe, after taking a picture of the signature on the informed consent form, I went to the hallway and called the number left on file. The phone rang for a long time before it was answered. The long rings gave me a bad feeling. I didn't give up and called again. The phone was finally picked up, but the voice was different, hoarse like sandpaper rubbing a surface. Hello, who is this? I recovered from my shock. Excuse me, are you Summer Green's husband? I was the doctor who performed her miscarriage surgery. How is she doing now? There was silence on the other end for a moment, followed by sounds of things being smashed. The man on the other end cursed. What the hell gives you the right to kill my son? Don't you pretend to care about that bitch. She couldn't even keep a baby, why doesn't she just die? With that, I heard the dull thud of a stick hitting flesh, followed by Summer Green's cries. I'm sorry. Please spare me. I can have another baby for you. Hearing this, the man gasped roughly and hung up. I didn't know what connection this man had to Robert Miller, but as a woman, I had just heard Summer Green being abused, and I couldn't bear it. I didn't hesitate and called the police for her. Joe Black had already found the address of the rundown neighborhood where Summer Green lived based on the information I gave him. And in the video he sent me, taken by a drone through the window, a man wearing a baseball cap injected Summer Green with an unknown liquid, and she immediately collapsed to the ground, unconscious. As the police arrived, the man in the baseball cap was taken away. Following protocol based on proximity, Summer Green was sent back to City General Hospital. Based on the basic information Joe Black had investigated, I gave Summer Green a full physical examination. The results sent a chill down my spine. Summer Green had been injected with a large dose of tranquilizers. Even after I treated her, her condition wasn't optimistic. She might become simple-minded or lose her memory. And David Peterson, the man who was taken away, was indeed Summer Green's legal husband. They had gotten their marriage certificate a year ago. Even stranger, the phone number I recognized was registered under David Peterson's name. Had my suspicions of the past few months just been my own paranoia? Had I perhaps remembered the phone number incorrectly? But the voice in the operating room that night was clearly Robert Miller's. Having known and lived with my husband for 10 years, there was no way I could have mistaken his voice. Joe Black didn't tell the police I was investigating my husband for cheating. He just said he was a drone enthusiast and happened to capture a video of David Peterson's actions. However, after David Peterson was interviewed and gave a statement at the police station, he was quickly released. The reason was simple: Summer Green had a severe history of mental illness, and the hospitalization records from the psychiatric hospital/mental institution were quite complete. And in public, David Peterson had always been portrayed as a loving husband who stayed by his sick wife's side. According to David Peterson, he had just been unable to bear the pain after Summer Green lost the baby and had injected her with medication during her episode, but he didn't expect to overdose her. I didn't know how David Peterson could accurately measure the dosage, but his goal may have been achieved. Summer Green woke up after being in a coma for 3 days. When she saw me, Summer Green's eyes were hazy. She tried to look at me but seemed not to recognize me. Have we met somewhere before? I'm Dr. Vance. We saw each other last week, don't you remember? She thought for a moment, and as I expected, shook her head. I don't remember. Was I sick last week? You were pregnant at the time. Before I could finish, Summer Green touched her belly with a joyful expression. I remember now, I was pregnant with my husband's baby. Dr. Vance, my husband loves me so much, he dreams of me having his baby. Her face showed the happiness of an expectant mother, making me unable to bring myself to tell her the baby was gone. I casually took out a photo of Robert Miller. Sure enough, Summer Green cried out happily, "Dr. Vance, you know my husband too? Where did you get this photo? This is exactly what my husband will look like when he's older." How could Robert Miller in the photo be considered old? He was just more mature compared to when he was 20. My guess was confirmed. The husband Summer Green mentioned and the husband on the marriage certificate seemed to be different people. However, when David Peterson came to pick her up from the hospital, she happily ran into his arms, sweetly calling him husband. I was completely bewildered. Perhaps she really was mentally confused and her memory was jumbled? As a medical professional, I couldn't convince myself of such a far-fetched, supernatural explanation. Unless there was one possibility, Summer Green was faking it. And proving she was faking it was simple. No one knew that after the internal medicine doctor performed a gastric lavage/stomach pumping on Summer Green, I took the contents from her stomach. It was a cute miniature Cupid. When the CT scan showed a foreign object in Summer Green's stomach, we performed a gastric lavage/stomach pumping. The object had been swallowed only a short time before, so the Cupid was recovered mostly intact. When I got home, I went to Robert Miller's bookshelf in the study/home office. I remembered that Robert Miller had ordered a pair of Cupid-shaped USB drive/flash drives made on Valentine's Day/our anniversary that year. Because I had lost the USB drive/flash drive I used to record experimental data at school, he specifically custom ordered this anti-loss Cupid for me. However, the Cupid from Summer Green's stomach no longer had its chain. I searched through everything and indeed couldn't find that USB drive/flash drive. I don't know what I was feeling when I inserted the USB drive/flash drive into the computer and opened it. My heart pounded like a drum, and cold sweat beaded on my palms. If Summer Green was faking amnesia, then all her actions were intended to get this USB drive/flash drive to me. The USB drive/flash drive was full of files. The files were divided into two main categories, one named Eleanor Vance, and the other named Summer Green. They were organized by month. Opening the folder named after me, I felt my head spin. It was full of my private photos and videos of us together. Only Robert Miller's face wasn't visible in the videos. These photos and videos were all taken at home. My hands and feet went cold. Maybe there were surveillance cameras secretly filming me where I couldn't see. I quickly sent a message to Joe Black, asking him how to find the surveillance cameras at home. Without a word, he sent a female colleague to my place to sweep for bugs. Sure enough, his colleague confirmed there were surveillance cameras in the bedroom and bathroom. Fortunately, there were none in other places. To avoid alerting him, I didn't have his colleague remove the surveillance cameras. I needed to see what was in Summer Green's folder before deciding what to do next. As a fellow woman, his colleague was extremely sympathetic to my situation. We both knew without saying it where those photos and videos would ultimately end up. His colleague opened her laptop and quickly hacked the surveillance cameras. Unless the other party was a master manipulator, they wouldn't realize the surveillance cameras had stopped working. After opening Summer Green's folder, my heart pounded even harder. Summer Green had endured 2 years of monstrous treatment. Perhaps there wasn't enough memory, and more wasn't saved. She had no mental illness whatsoever, she was just one of Robert Miller's targets for revenge. From the records of his torment of Summer Green, I pieced together the entire truth. Robert Miller and I were originally strangers. In my junior year, I was walking back to the dormitory after finishing experiments in the medical school teaching building. I could have taken the well-lit path back to the dorm, but it would have been a long detour. I didn't hesitate to take the shortcut, which passed by a sports field and the hill behind the dorms of the women's dormitory. Because this path was the closest to the medical school and near the hill behind the dorms, few people walked it at night. Schoolmates called it the road of no return. It was winter then, and I was shivering from the cold after finishing my experiments. I just wanted to get back to the dorm quickly to get hot water and take a warm shower. I was known as an experiment fanatic. As long as I notified her in advance, Aunt Carol, the dorm supervisor, would always open the door for me after 11 p.m. But that night, I finished my experiment at midnight, and I was afraid of keeping Aunt Carol waiting for too long, so I almost ran all the way back to the dorm. The tree shadows on both sides of the road danced under the dim street lights. I half closed my eyes, terrified. In truth, nothing had ever happened on this path before. But that night, something happened to me. A tall, strong man sprang out from the hill behind the dorms. I was so startled I immediately fell to the ground. He wore a thick, integrated fur hat, only revealing a pair of hazy, lecherous eyes. As he approached me like he was stalking prey, it was too late for me to scream for help. He clamped his hand tightly over my mouth and dragged me into the deep ditch between the hill behind the dorms and the concrete road. I struggled desperately, but it was no use. The ditch was just wide enough for one person, and once I was dragged in, I had no room to move. I could feel his panic. I pleaded with him, but he just grunted and tugged at my clothes. Just as I was about to give up hope, the cold wind blowing through my thin clothes, Aunt Carol, the dorm supervisor, came looking for me with some people. She held a flashlight and kept calling my name. I stopped struggling, fumbled for my iPhone, and turned off the silent mode. When my phone rang, I felt like I was alive again. He was just inches away from succeeding. Aunt Carol, the dorm supervisor, along with her nephew Robert Miller, saved me. When she pulled me out of the deep ditch, I was shaking uncontrollably and sobbing. The man who intended to assault me ran off, but Robert Miller chased after him with all his might, and the two men wrestled. When the security guards arrived, the man had brutally smashed Robert Miller in the groin with a rock from the ground. His screams were particularly chilling in the silent night. The police arrived shortly after and took the man, who had been subdued by the security guards, away. Robert Miller, because of the blow, was taken to City General Hospital. To protect my reputation, the school did not publicize the incident. The man who attempted rape was named Henry Green. Robert Miller stayed in City General Hospital for over half a month. Although I was embarrassed about his injured area, my conscience compelled me to visit him at City General Hospital every few days. It was during that time that I fell for him. Aunt Carol, the dorm supervisor, and her nephew, who saved me from the deep ditch in the freezing winter, were the heroes who came to my rescue. When Robert Miller was fully recovered, we started dating. Aunt Carol, the dorm supervisor, treated me like her own daughter every day and couldn't wait for me to graduate and marry into the Miller family. Robert Miller treated me exceptionally well, respecting me and never crossing boundaries. Even though it was incredibly difficult for him, he said he didn't want our relationship to be improper. He said that although the incident hadn't been successful, it left a huge psychological shadow on a young woman. He hoped our most beautiful moment would be when he married me. After graduating from university, we got our marriage certificate on Valentine's Day / our anniversary. A night of passion is worth 1,000 pieces of gold. We were deeply in love and happy at that time. I never imagined that the injury Robert Miller sustained 2 years ago when he saved me had left a hidden problem. It turned out he didn't want children at all. He couldn't have them. He knew from the start that he would never have children in his life. But he wouldn't give up hope. Because the doctor had told him that there was still a chance of curing azoospermia caused by trauma. It was just that he was severely injured at the time. The injury I thought would heal in half a month actually took him nearly half a year to recover from. This was why he endured and didn't touch me. Later, he tried various Chinese medicines and hormone treatments, but all were fruitless. He even doubted himself and his masculinity. I can understand a man suffering alone from the agony and pain of being unable to have an heir or even be sexually active. But his love turned into hate. He hated why I had to stay so late doing experiments. He hated why I made his aunt leave the door open for me. He hated that he just went to bring his aunt a late-night snack and was forced to be a good Samaritan, only to end up without an heir. It turned out his hot and cold behavior towards me that year wasn't because he was preoccupied with graduating. It was because he wanted to break up with me. But he was unwilling to let go. If he was infertile, what other woman would want to be with him? He was 3 years older than me, the only male heir / the last of the line of the Miller family, and he didn't want to give up. What's more, before we got our marriage certificate, he hadn't done anything more intimate than holding hands and kissing. It seemed he felt he hadn't gotten his money's worth unless he slept with me. He deeply regretted his actions. When he confessed his infertility to his family, everyone, including his aunt, unanimously demanded that he marry me. This was the price for saving me, Eleanor Vance. They helped him bribe a doctor to fake a vasectomy. Regardless of whether he could have children, at least he would have a wife. After we got married, we were a loving couple. I never imagined that everything was fake. He not only hated me but also hated Henry Green. But Henry Green, at the time of the attempted assault, was already terminally ill and beyond medical treatment. When Henry Green came down from the hill behind the dorms late at night and saw me, he had a sudden impulse to try and get something before he died, but he was sent to jail by Aunt Carol, the dorm supervisor, and her nephew. Before he could be released, Henry Green died of pancreatic cancer. When the perpetrator died, Robert Miller, with nowhere to vent his rage, finally transferred all his hatred onto me. Based on the videos and the files, it seems Robert Miller deliberately approached Summer Green after investigating her. Summer Green was originally my junior from the same university, and by coincidence, she lived in the dormitory building managed by Aunt Carol. She had a face remarkably similar to Henry Green's, but her eyes were clean and clear. In the video, she pleaded with Robert Miller, begging him to let her go. But Robert Miller became more excited, constantly shouting that he loved Summer Green. In that moment, Robert Miller was more despicable than Henry Green. Robert Miller was a psychology graduate. He knew deeply how to break a person's will. He used his profession to cover his tracks, brainwashing and manipulating Summer Green, gradually building a history of mental illness for her. He used deep hypnosis on her, causing Summer Green's memory to become confused. 2 years ago, Summer Green became pregnant. But Robert Miller didn't know it. He fully indulged in tormenting Summer Green in the name of love, causing her to have a miscarriage. This discovery enraged Robert Miller. He frantically searched everywhere for the will. The man who got Summer Green pregnant, and even personally sent her to a psychiatric hospital/mental institution. But later, he discovered that the child was his own. Summer Green initially loved Robert Miller. Brainwashed women deeply believe in their love. It wasn't until Robert Miller suspected her of cheating and hit her, then sent her to a psychiatric hospital/mental institution, that she finally sobered up. During the half-year she spent in the psychiatric hospital/mental institution, Summer Green did try to seek help. But no one would believe the words of a crazy person. As Summer Green's attending physician, Robert Miller was never a suspect, especially since he had bribed the director of the psychiatric hospital/mental institution. I just didn't know if the Miller family had privately helped Robert Miller with his wicked deeds. He played the role of a loving husband with me while also selling my photos and videos for ill-gotten gains. At the same time, he played the role of a good doctor and boyfriend with Summer Green. Before Robert Miller picked Summer Green up from the psychiatric hospital/mental institution, he had been trying for years to get me pregnant without success. He avoided facing the truth. David told him maybe it was some twisted form of cosmic justice, using Summer to compensate for Henry's actions. Robert Miller, fully convinced, brought Summer Green out of the psychiatric hospital/mental institution. He arranged for David Peterson, his distant cousin-in-law whose wife had died, to marry Summer Green. Behind the scenes, however, it was always him and Summer Green having a secret affair. Perhaps fate is indeed mystical. Summer Green became pregnant again. Having suffered countless hardships in the psychiatric hospital/mental institution, Summer Green finally became smarter and learned to save herself. She absolutely didn't want to give birth to Robert Miller's child. Under David Peterson's strict surveillance cameras, she couldn't go to City General Hospital or even a pharmacy. That day, Robert Miller went overseas for a business trip. David Peterson, believing Summer Green was now docile and obedient, relaxed his guard when a friend called him out for drinks. Joe Black's investigation revealed that Summer Green went to several nearby pharmacies to buy emergency contraception at that time. She was gambling, hoping to cause a miscarriage. She gambled correctly. Perhaps she never expected to almost die. I finally understood now why she looked at me like family the first time she saw me. She and I were both victims. Our photos and videos were being sold wildly on shady websites. We were both harmed by Henry Green and Robert Miller. I even thought despairingly that I wished Robert Miller and his aunt hadn't come looking for me that year. That way, perhaps I would have been the only one to suffer. But the gears of fate, set in motion when I was dragged into that overgrown ditch, couldn't be stopped. What I initially thought was a miracle and a chivalrous rescue was not a free gift. Fate had put an exorbitant price tag on that rescue. The hero fell from the clouds, transforming into a monstrous hidden among men, destroying the lives of 2 innocent girls. Or perhaps, he was a monstrous wearing human skin all along. Jenny Chen, the colleague Joe Black found for me, quietly stayed with me and watched all the videos. Her mouth was pursed, her eyes red, and she gave me a big hug. Sister, scumbags will get what's coming to them. Let me and my mentor get revenge for you. Jenny Chen, the hacker expert, was online. She hacked into Robert Miller's computer for me. It didn't just contain the contents of that USB drive/flash drive, but also many photos and videos of Robert Miller taking advantage of his position to harass attractive patients. I never expected that the psychology clinic that my parents had invested heavily to open for him was being used in such a disgraceful way by him. He was a disgrace to the profession of psychology. I didn't know if the victimized girls were even aware that they had been violated. Maybe it was better if they didn't know. After all, the girls seeking help from Robert Miller as a psychologist often had psychological issues. If they knew that the doctor they trusted had done such monstrous things to them, would their conditions worsen? Jenny Chen followed Robert Miller's account and tracked him to the dark web where he was selling illegal videos and images. These shady websites are constantly changing locations. Their security can't stand up to scrutiny. Jenny Chen left no trace as she downloaded all the user data. As a righteous hacker, after downloading the user data, she proceeded to hack into other people's computers. As luck would have it, Jenny Chen found that Robert Miller's account was currently active. He was on the dark web looking for big buyers to peddle his recent goodies. But Robert Miller had no idea that the goods on his laptop had suddenly vanished. It seemed he kept his goods backed up everywhere, waiting for the right price. I knew it. The psychology clinic's traffic was normal, but how could its income be several times higher than the industry average? Turns out it was all ill-gotten gains. I was just grateful that when my parents funded his psychology clinic, he had pretended to write and sign an IOU to gain their trust. Perhaps Robert Miller was used to using a USB drive/flash drive for backups, which allowed Summer Green to get hold of some of the data. So, when Jenny Chen hacked the goods Robert Miller was about to sell again, I stopped Jenny Chen, who was ready to continue hacking. Jenny, can you replace his stuff with viruses? As long as he takes the money, the nature of the act changes. Looking at the prices, these must be big customers. Jenny Chen instantly understood and looked at me with starry eyes full of admiration. Sister, you're the clever one. Money in hand, goods delivered. Across the ocean, Robert Miller, with trembling hands and an excited heart, sent the compressed files with one click. Countless computers across the country went dark in the middle of the night. The data in several dark web databases were wiped out. Unless there was a technical expert of master level, they wouldn't be able to recover even a single JPG, let alone videos. After finishing her work, Jenny Chen, rubbing her hands together excitedly, high-fived me. Sister, what do you need me to do next? Wait for the big bosses to get desperate. It'll be fun to watch them turn on each other. Jenny Chen got her instructions and slept at my place that night. In her eyes, I, a gynecologist who knew nothing about technology, was skilled at playing the game. She said, Sister, this kind of dealing with scumbags is so much fun. Yes, I felt a lot better too. I just wondered if Summer Green was sleeping peacefully at the hospital right now. Perhaps she was still eagerly waiting for me to help her. But I didn't understand why she didn't bring the USB drive/flash drive with her when she called for an ambulance after the miscarriage that day. Why did she risk swallowing the USB drive/flash drive? What if Joe Black hadn't taken the video, and the police hadn't saved her? Wouldn't she have been completely finished? The next day, I went to City General Hospital with dark circles under my eyes. I had too much on my mind to sleep well. Upon arrival, I went to see Summer Green first. Fortunately, this time, due to police involvement, David Peterson didn't dare to forcibly take her from me again. When I arrived, Summer Green was looking at David Peterson with deep affection, appearing obedient and docile, which was heartbreaking to see. Compared to her, my only luck was that I hadn't been subjected to domestic abuse by Robert Miller. When David Peterson saw me, his eyes were hostile and wary. You must be Dr. Vance. If you hadn't caused my wife's miscarriage, she wouldn't have suffered. And you made me go to the police station. Get out of here right now. My family and you just don't get along. I watched David Peterson spout nonsense with a cold gaze. I have to say, he was pretty good at blaming the victim. If I didn't know he was afraid of Robert Miller returning and finding out about his failure to keep watch, I would have applauded his show of deep affection. He was just as much of a scum as Robert Miller. I had seen David Peterson's signature in Robert Miller's study/home office once. Robert Miller claimed it was patient information, and I hadn't paid much attention. Now that I thought about it, there must have been some shady dealings and secrets between them. David Peterson was Summer Green's legal husband, so I really couldn't do anything about him yet. But once Jenny Chen and Joe Black uncovered his dirty deeds, I wondered how arrogant he could still be. During lunch, while David Peterson went to go to the bathroom, I quickly went to the ward to find Summer Green. I got straight to the point. I've seen the Cupid. Summer Green looked up sharply, scanned her surroundings, and then carefully dropped her smiling facade. Dr. Vance, are you really willing to help me? I know my brother did something monstrous to you back then. I apologize to you on his behalf. I'll work like a dog for the rest of my life to repay you for him. So, she really knew. But unlike Robert Miller, as Henry Green's biological sister, she didn't hate me. Even a young girl knows that injustice has a head and a master, and debts must be repaid. But Robert Miller went back on being a hero and became a monstrous instead. No, calling him a monstrous is an insult to animals. I patted her shoulder. Summer Green, we are both victims in this tragedy. How could I stand by and do nothing? You shouldn't have risked your life. What if I hadn't saved you? What if I hadn't found the Cupid? Wouldn't you have been completely finished? Summer Green shook her head bitterly. I knew you loved Robert Miller. If I had come to you rashly back then, how could you have believed a crazy person? She was right. I had only confirmed Robert Miller was cheating. But convincing me of such a bizarre story without evidence would have been difficult. Besides, I stole the USB drive/flash drive after I was discharged and went back home, when David Peterson was on the phone with you. That was his treasure. When I saw the drone at the time, my sixth sense told me it was you, so I swallowed the USB drive/flash drive as a gamble. So that was it. Now, take good care of yourself. I'll handle the rest. Wait for my good news. As I walked out of the ward, I bumped into David Peterson returning from the bathroom. He had a dark look, as if I owed him a fortune. He deliberately bumped my shoulder, but I anticipated it and moved away. If I was right, Robert Miller probably knew things had gotten to me. Sure enough, Robert Miller, who was originally scheduled to return in 3 days, came back home that night. When Jenny Chin told me the scum was home, I felt extremely uncomfortable. But it wasn't my night shift, and I had to face what needed to be faced. As I forced myself to go home after work, Robert Miller was busy in the kitchen. Rose petals were scattered from the entrance to the bedroom. Hearing the door open, Robert Miller put down his spatula and tried to hug me. I pushed him away. No, I just got off work, I'm covered in germs and viruses. Robert Miller didn't mind at all, forcefully hugged me, and happily presented his treasure. Wife, I brought you a surprise. Go find the treasure. Under his expectant gaze, I followed the rose petals to the bedroom. Robert Miller had always been romantic. The rose petals on the bed were arranged in a heart shape. A delicate gift box was waiting for me to open. Seeing me hesitate, Robert Miller urged, Wife, go open it. Just thinking about where the money for the gift came from made me feel sick to my stomach. I pulled the ribbon, and the gift was revealed. Opening the box, it was the Rolex green submariner I had had my eye on for a long time. Robert Miller's expected excited squeal didn't happen. He looked at me somewhat disappointed. Wife, why aren't you reacting? React? Since you want a reaction, I'll give you one. I gathered all my strength and slapped Robert Miller hard across the face several times. High red marks from the slap quickly appeared on his cheeks. Robert Miller, stunned by the blows, still tried to play it off. Wife, your way of reacting is a bit unique. I couldn't be bothered with him and simply handed him a divorce agreement. Robert Miller, let's get a divorce. He looked bewildered, then asked with a sinking face, Eleanor Vance, did you take the wrong medicine today? What did I do that makes you so despicable? Until everything was finally over, I wouldn't tell him the real reason. You have money to buy a Rolex green submariner, but no money to pay back my parents? You signed an IOU back then saying you'd repay the money in 2 years, but how many 2-year periods have passed, and you still haven't paid it back? Robert Miller heard the reason and smiled easily. Wife, you're angry with me just for this? I've mentioned repaying my parents many times before, but they told me not to rush. Honestly, if they needed money, they could have just asked me directly, instead of going through all this trouble and almost scaring me into losing my wife. Robert Miller was truly a master manipulator. He controlled his emotions perfectly. He pulled out his phone from his apron and was about to transfer money to my parents right there. But he looked confused and asked me, Wife, I don't seem to have their account number. Just transfer it to me, I have my parents' account. I wanted to see if he would transfer it. As I glanced at the divorce agreement, he gritted his teeth and transferred $1 million. Wife, I borrowed $800,000 back then. This extra $200,000 is the interest. After receiving the money, I finally put the Rolex green submariner on my wrist. Robert Miller happily ran back to the kitchen to prepare a candlelight dinner. As he turned, that fleeting dark look and anger were clearly caught by me. He had a painful loss, it cost him dearly. I guessed he would try to sell things again tonight. Jenny Chan and I were waiting for this exact moment. After busy cleaning up the dishes, he coaxed me, Wife, you go to bed first. I have a few patients who need consultations tonight. I'll join you when I'm done. I agreed compliantly. He probably still had no idea that he had really screwed things up for people last time. To sell at a higher price, he contacted his previous big customers again, saying he had top-tier goods. He was practically walking right into a trap. The regular perverts who bought his compressed files could only accept their loss and blame themselves, they wouldn't dare call the police. But this time, he still thought others were fools. The powerful perverts who were struggling to find him couldn't stand it. Many of these respectable-looking big shots were executives and leaders from major companies. Their hacked computers contained a lot of important company secrets. The data was priceless, and as one-click send caused them huge losses. These people wouldn't just accept their loss and let him off the hook. Now he was coming back, trying to swindle them again. Who would believe him? They had already called the police, but because he was using an overseas IP address at the time, the federal authorities/FBI had trouble confirming his location. Now that he was back in the country, the big shots discreetly contacted the police. With Jenny Chen's help, the police were able to track his IP address and find him. I lay in bed, quietly waiting for the doorbell. Robert Miller muttered a curse word/an expletive and went to open the door. Seeing a team of police officers outside, he was so scared his GS started shaking. I got up, wrapped in a robe. Honey, who is it this late? I pretended to be woken up by the noise, then my expression froze in exaggerated surprise. Officers, what's going on? The police didn't mince words, showed their arrest warrant, and entered to apprehend him. I acted utterly unbelievable. Robert Miller tried to close the door, but his supposedly strong body was no match for the police officers. He struggled and resisted arrest. He was finally pinned to the ground, hands behind his back, and even after being handcuffed, he kept shouting, "Officers, there must be some misunderstanding. I'm being framed." With overwhelming evidence, no amount of shouting or claiming innocence would help him. All Jenny Chen did was follow my instructions and plant a few viruses in his folders. He sent the files himself, and he received the money. His desperate struggle was ultimately futile. In the end, Robert Miller was sentenced for multiple crimes. Robert Miller took the blame for all the customers whose computers were hacked. The psychology clinic was closed down permanently. I didn't want my parents to worry, so I didn't tell them until I successfully obtained the divorce decree and received the marital property that rightfully belonged to me. Summer Green testified in court, detailing the monstrous actions of both Robert Miller and David Peterson. The two buddies ended up in jail together. And Summer Green and I were both free from the scumbags. Given the large number of victims in Robert Miller's case, and that most of them had psychological issues, the court chose to hold a non-public trial. This also served to protect those innocent girls. When the verdict came down, Summer Green sobbed uncontrollably in my arms. "Ellie, thank you. If you hadn't helped me, I would have only been able to take them down with her." She knew Robert Miller wouldn't let her die. He still hoped Summer Green would have children to carry on his name. All that awaited her was an endless abyss of darkness. If she had tried to take them down with her, how little power a weak woman has. Robert Miller and David Peterson might not have received the punishment they deserved. In court, Robert Miller's family was full of rage, wanting to tear Summer Green apart on the spot. But when the secret truth was revealed, they were so shocked and ashamed to have such a family member that they couldn't face me. The matter was finally settled. Summer Green and I, who were forcibly caught in the gears of fate, raised a glass to celebrate our victory with Joe Black and Jenny Chen. Here's to getting rid of the scumbags. To victory and new beginnings. At that moment, I was incredibly grateful that I was the emergency doctor on duty the night Summer Green was bleeding heavily. I was also grateful that when David Peterson went out drinking, he was drunk enough to forward his calls to Robert Miller. The serendipitous coincidences were fate's gift to us. The end.